Have you ever found yourself walking away from a phone call with your grown child and thinking, why did that feel so heavy? You didn't raise your voice. You didn't say anything untrue. But something about the conversation left a weight in the air, a tension you could almost touch. If that's ever happened to you, you're not alone. As we get older, we often reflect more deeply on our relationships, especially with our adult children. We want those relationships to be loving, supportive, and close. But sometimes, even with the best intentions, we say things that come out wrong. Or worse, we say things we've heard all our lives, maybe from our own parents, that unknowingly leave emotional bruises. It's not always about yelling or arguing. Sometimes it's a simple sentence, a passing comment that lands the wrong way and lingers for days, weeks, or even years. Words have a way of sticking, especially when they come from a parent. And while we might feel we're offering advice or simply being honest, our children might hear criticism, disapproval, or even rejection. That's why today, I want to gently walk you through a conversation many of us avoid, but truly need to have. The kinds of toxic things parents sometimes say to their adult children, not because they mean harm, but because these habits were passed down or go unchecked. And I say this with compassion, not blame, because the truth is, we can't go back and undo the past, but we can become more mindful in the present, and that can make all the difference. Let's start with something that seems innocent, but often cuts deeper than we realize. Have you ever said something like, "You'd be so much happier if you just lost a little weight"? Or maybe, "Why don't you dress more like your sister?" These kinds of comments often come from a place of love. We want our children to look good, feel good, be accepted. But to them, it might feel like they're not good enough just as they are. When we comment on appearance, especially when it's framed as a criticism or a comparison, it can feel like rejection. Imagine your child, now in their 40s or 50s, still carrying around the belief that they're not attractive enough, that their body is something to be judged, that no matter what they do, they'll never be quite right in your eyes. That's a heavy burden, and one we might have placed without even realizing it. And sometimes it's not just about appearance, it's about behavior. Maybe you've asked, "Why are you always so emotional?" Or said, "You've always been the dramatic one." These remarks can seem small, even playful, but when repeated, they chip away at self-esteem. Your child starts to believe they're too much, too sensitive, too difficult. They begin to silence themselves, not just around you, but around others too. One woman in her 60s once told me she'd spent her whole life thinking she had to be quiet in order to be loved. As a child, her parents constantly told her to stop crying, to toughen up. Now, even as a grandmother, she struggles to express sadness or vulnerability. That's the kind of wound words can leave behind. Another phrase that can be especially damaging, though it's often said in a moment of frustration, is, "I wish you were more like your brother," or "Why can't you be more like your cousin?" Comparisons are deeply painful, especially when they come from a parent. Even if we believe we're just pointing out a helpful example, our child hears something very different. "You're not enough." "You've failed me." "You'll never measure up." It's one thing for a teacher or a boss to compare someone, but when it's your own parent, it hits a different nerve. And over time, those comparisons don't just hurt the relationship between you and your child. They also affect the relationships between siblings. They breed resentment, competition, and distance. No adult wants to feel like they're still being graded at a family dinner. Another thing we often say without realizing its impact is, "After everything I've done for you." Now let's be honest, raising kids is hard. Many of us have made sacrifices we rarely talk about. We worked extra jobs, gave up personal dreams, lost sleep, and poured our hearts into their well-being. That truth deserves to be honored. But when we remind our children of those sacrifices in the middle of a disagreement, it changes the tone. It stops being a conversation and starts feeling like guilt. It sends the message that love was conditional, something given only in exchange for obedience, gratitude, or performance. That's not the kind of legacy most of us want to leave behind. And then there's the phrase that can shatter trust like glass. You're making a big mistake. Now, yes, sometimes our kids do make mistakes. Big ones. They marry the wrong person, quit a steady job, move across the country on a whim. And it's natural to want to protect them from pain. But here's the thing. Adult children need to live their own lives. They need to stumble and learn, just like we did. When we tell them they're making a mistake, they may hear, "I don't believe in you. You're not capable of making good choices." And slowly, they stop coming to us for advice, not because they don't love us, but because they don't feel safe being honest. Instead of calling something a mistake, try asking questions. How are you feeling about this decision? What made you choose that direction? These questions open the door to real conversation and keep the connection alive. What we say matters. And when we're aware of our words, we have the power to build stronger, more loving relationships with our children, even if they're already grown with families of their own. Because it's never too late to grow. Sometimes we speak out of habit. We don't mean to hurt our kids. We don't even realize we're doing it. But the truth is, some of the things we say, especially when emotions run high, can sit with our adult children for years. Let's talk about one of the most painful things a parent can say, even if it's just in a moment of frustration. "If it weren't for you, I could have done so much more with my life." Or, "You ruined my chance at happiness." These words might not be said often, but when they are, they're devastating. They tell your child that their very existence was a mistake, that somehow your dreams were lost because of them, even if you were going through a hard time, even if you didn't mean it that way. That message cuts deep. One man I spoke with in his 40s recalled his mother saying, "If I hadn't had you so young, I'd have finished college." He carried that comment with him through adulthood, not because it was said every day, but because it told him he was an obstacle, not a blessing. And that's the thing about words. You only need to say something once for it to stick. That's why it's so important to pause and ask ourselves, is this how I want my child to remember me? Is this the legacy I want to leave behind? Sometimes it's not about big dramatic statements. Sometimes it's the little things we say during daily conversations that send a message of disapproval or mistrust. For example, "You're too sensitive," or "You always overreact." These kinds of statements shut people down. They dismiss emotions instead of understanding them. And when you're speaking to your adult child, someone who's come to you, likely in a vulnerable state, these words can feel like a slap in the face. Think about how it feels when you're upset and someone tells you to calm down or stop being dramatic. It's not comforting. It's invalidating. Now imagine hearing that from your parent, the person who's supposed to be your safest place. Here's the truth. Every generation was raised with different emotional tools. Many of us grew up in a time when emotions were kept inside, when strength meant silence. But we know now that acknowledging our feelings is not weakness, it's courage. And when we extend that courage to our children, we help them feel safe, valued, and understood. Now let's talk about a phrase that often comes from a place of deep worry, but can create distance instead of closeness. When are you going to settle down? It might sound like a simple question, but for someone who's single, recently divorced, or still figuring things out, it feels like a judgment wrapped in curiosity. It tells them they're behind. that their life isn't where it's supposed to be? What if your daughter is 45 and hasn't found the right partner? What if your son is happy living alone, working on his own timeline? What if your child is gay or transgender and still navigating how to feel accepted, even by you? When we ask, "When will you give me grandchildren?" Or, "Are you ever going to find someone?" we may be unintentionally reinforcing the idea that they're not enough as they are. That their value lies in fulfilling our expectations, not in their own joy. But love doesn't come with a schedule. Neither does fulfillment. Sometimes the most supportive thing we can say is, "I love you exactly as you are." Those words can do more than any piece of advice ever could. Another subtle yet powerful phrase that can create a rift is this: "You've changed." Now, of course, your child has changed. We all do. That's part of growing older, wiser, and more independent. But when "you've changed" is said with disappointment instead of pride, it sends a message that who they are now isn't good enough. Think about how it feels to be told that the person you've become, the one you've worked hard to grow into, is somehow a letdown. It's painful, especially if your child has made hard decisions to protect their health, their peace, or their boundaries. Let's say your daughter used to call every day, and now she only calls once a week. Maybe she's juggling work, raising kids, or dealing with stress you don't see. Or your son used to visit every holiday, and now he needs space to tend to his own mental health. If you respond with guilt or sadness, "You never call anymore. You used to care more," they'll hear a different message. "Your needs aren't important. Only mine are." We can't control the changes in our adult children's lives, but we can choose how we respond to them. And if our response is understanding rather than resistance, it leaves the door open for connection rather than pushing them further away. It's also important to talk about a more subtle form of toxicity, making everything about ourselves. For example, your child shares a difficult experience, and instead of listening, you respond with, "That's nothing. When I was your age," or, "Well, I had it even worse." These kinds of responses don't come from cruelty, they come from wanting to relate. But they shift the focus away from your child's feelings and back onto your own. Over time, this can make your child feel unheard, like there's no room for their story, their pain, or their growth. Instead, try simply saying, "That sounds really hard," or "I'm here for you." It may feel small, but it tells them you're listening, and that's powerful. And perhaps one of the most heartbreaking things we can say to our children, especially in conflict, is, "You're just like your father," or "You're turning into your mother." Even if those people are no longer part of your life, even if they hurt you, using them as insults weaponizes your past pain and turns it into present damage. Your child isn't responsible for your history. They didn't choose your partner. And when you say they're just like someone you resent, it can feel like you're rejecting them at the core. It tells them they're flawed, stained, doomed to repeat mistakes that aren't even theirs. Instead of blaming or labeling, focus on what you're truly feeling. If your child's behavior hurts, say, "That really hurt me," or "I'm feeling pushed away." That level of honesty invites healing, not shame. At the heart of all of this is one simple truth: your words hold more power than you may ever realize. And as parents, we never stop shaping our children, not even when they're grown, raising kids of their own, or navigating retirement. But that power isn't a burden. It's a gift. Because no matter how many years have passed, it's never too late to change the conversation. To choose words that heal instead of harm. That build instead of break. That bring us closer rather than drive us apart. Every parent-child relationship is layered. It holds years of memories, routines, misunderstandings, joys, and silent hopes. And sometimes when we speak to our grown children, we forget that while they may be adults now, they're still carrying the echoes of our voices from childhood. Some of the most damaging words a parent can say don't come from anger, but from withdrawal. Few things are more painful than emotional distance between a parent and their child. And nothing shuts that door faster than this phrase, "If that's how you feel, then maybe we shouldn't talk anymore." It sounds final. It's a threat disguised as hurt feelings. Maybe it slips out during a heated conversation, or maybe it's meant to prompt an apology. But for your child, it feels like abandonment. It turns a disagreement into rejection. It makes love feel conditional. And here's the truth. Even in adulthood, most children, no matter how old, still crave the security of knowing their parents won't walk away. Even if they're married, raising kids, or retired, they still carry that longing for unconditional love. Saying you'll cut off contact even temporarily sends a chilling message. My love depends on your behavior. But love isn't about always agreeing. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Now let's talk about silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind used as punishment. Some parents fall into a habit of giving the cold shoulder when they're hurt or disappointed. Maybe your child said something that stung. Maybe they made a decision you strongly disagree with. So you go quiet. You wait for them to reach out. You let the silence speak for you. But silence, used this way, isn't power. It's pain. It leaves your child confused, anxious, unsure of how to make things right. And over time, it teaches them that honesty leads to disconnection, that love disappears when things get difficult, that it's safer to hide parts of themselves than risk being shut out. Instead of silence, try using words like, "I need time to process this, but I still love you." Or, "I don't have the right words yet, but I'm not going anywhere." Those phrases leave the door open. They say, "I'm human, but I'm still here." Because the greatest gift you can give your child isn't perfection, it's presence. Another subtle but painful thing parents often say is, "I know you better than you know yourself." It might feel like a sign of deep connection or wisdom earned through years of raising them. But to your adult child, it can feel dismissive. When you say you know them better than they know themselves, you may be unintentionally silencing their growth. Because the truth is, they're constantly evolving, just like you. And by adulthood, they've gathered life experiences you weren't there to witness, pain you didn't see, achievements you didn't guide them through. Instead of assuming, try asking, "What's important to you right now?" Or, "What does that choice mean to you?" You might be surprised by the depth of their answers and how much closer it brings you. Because listening to your adult child as a peer, rather than someone to correct, is one of the most powerful shifts you can make in your relationship. And perhaps one of the hardest phrases to talk about, the one many of us have heard or even said, is, "You owe me." It might be said jokingly, "After all I've done for you, the least you could do is visit more." Or it might be said during conflict, "I gave you everything, and this is how you treat me?" These phrases may come from a place of pain, but they are laced with guilt. And guilt doesn't grow love. It grows resentment. Yes, you've made sacrifices. You've given your time, energy, and love. And those sacrifices matter. But parenting isn't a transaction. Love isn't a loan that needs to be repaid. When you start framing your relationship as something your child owes you for, you're no longer relating from the heart. You're keeping score. And that can drain the joy out of even the most devoted bond. Instead of saying a "you owe me," try, "I'd love to spend more time with you because I miss you." It's honest. It's vulnerable. And it opens the door without pushing them through it. Because the relationships that last, the ones that bring peace in our later years, aren't built on obligation. They're built on mutual respect and open-hearted connection. As we close this conversation, I want to remind you of something important. Being a parent is the hardest, most beautiful, most complicated role many of us will ever have. And there's no instruction manual. We all say things we wish we could take back. We all fall short sometimes. But what matters most isn't where you've been. It's where you choose to go from here. If any part of this message stirred something in your heart, I invite you to take a moment, just a quiet moment, to ask yourself, is there something I need to say? Maybe it's an apology. Maybe it's a thank you. Maybe it's as simple as, I see you, and I'm proud of who you've become. Because those words have power too. And don't be afraid to start small. A single sentence can rebuild a bridge. A gentle tone can soften years of tension. And it's never too late, not at 60, not at 70, not ever, to turn a strained relationship into something healing, something whole. You have that power. So if this video resonated with you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Whether you've said some of these things in the past, or you've heard them from your own parents, this is a safe space to reflect, to grow, and to connect with others who are walking a similar path. If you found this helpful, please like the video and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life for more honest, heart-centered conversations like this one. We believe that every stage of life holds the opportunity for deeper love, better communication, and lasting peace of mind. Here's to you, your wisdom, your growth, and your courage. Here's to living your best life at any age. And most of all, here's to saying the kinds of words that heal.